The story opens inside a high-security federal prison in Colorado. A cold, silent place where time seems to stop. In one of the crowded common areas, an inmate named Ray Breslin keeps to himself, calm, observant. He's not like the others. You can just tell. One day, another prisoner leans in and quietly warns Ray about a guy named Jax. Word is, Jax is planning to start a fight. Ray doesn't react. He just listens, nods slightly, and files the information away like it's nothing new. The next day, it happens. Jax makes his move, lunging at Ray with a shank, but Ray doesn't panic. In a matter of seconds, he flips the attack around. Calm, fast, controlled. Jax is on the ground before the guards even show up. Because of the commotion, Ray is thrown into the SHU, the Secure Housing Unit. It's isolation at its harshest. No windows, just steel walls, a toilet, and a camera that never blinks. The only thing they let him keep is a Bible. But Ray? He doesn't waste time. That cell becomes his blueprint. Every moment he spends in that tiny box, he's studying, listening, watching. He figures out the SHU is located right next to the fire garage. And the guards? They take a smoke break every single day, 7 minutes long, never more, never less. Ray memorizes every step they take, every door they use, every second they're gone. Then he gets creative. From his meal trays, he peels off a thin layer of plastic from the chocolate milk container. Next time he's escorted out, he presses that clear plastic sheet against the keypad of the high-security cell. It's subtle. No one notices. Later, back in his cell, he examines the plastic under the light. Smudges. Fingerprints. Just enough to tell him which numbers the guard used. That narrows down the possible combinations. But Ray's not alone in this. Not really. He finds a way to send a coded message to his team outside. A simple letter, but with a hidden instruction. Create a distraction at exactly 4 p.m. on escape day. He also prepares soft, sticky balls of toilet paper soaked in soap. Not for cleaning, for jamming the cell door. And then, finally it's time. After returning from his walk, Ray casually wedges the soap-soaked paper into the lock. The guards leave for their smoke break, and the door doesn't seal all the way. Perfect. Ray punches in the code, opens the door, and slips out. Through a vent. Into the fire garage. No one's there. He throws on a firefighter's uniform. Right then, outside, the distraction hits. His team blows up a car just as planned. Chaos. As the fire trucks rush out, Ray latches himself underneath one of them, hanging on for dear life. Once they're far enough from the prison, he drops down and jumps into a getaway car. Waiting inside are Abigail and Hush, his most trusted allies. They drive him just far enough, then leave him by an old phone booth. Still in his prison robe, Ray walks up to the phone. A patrol car drives by and immediately slows down. More police cars arrive, surrounding him at gunpoint. But Ray doesn't panic. He just picks up the phone and calmly dials, and delivers the code. Not long after the call, a man named Lester Clark pulls up to the scene. Calm, confident, dressed like someone who's used to being in charge. He approaches the officers, flashes some documents, and speaks with authority. Whatever's in that paperwork does the trick. After a few tense moments, the cops stand down. Just like that, Ray's free. Ray and Lester head straight to the warden's office, both of them waiting quietly for the storm that's coming. And sure enough, when the warden walks in, he's livid. He doesn't even sit down, starts barking accusations, furious that his prison security has been breached. But then Lester drops the truth like a bomb. Ray's not just some prisoner with escape fantasies. He's actually the co-founder of Breslin Clark, a private security firm that specializes in testing prison systems. His entire job is breaking out of facilities like this one, going in undercover to see if they're really as escape-proof as they claim to be. Over the years, Ray has built a reputation, the guy who can break out of anywhere. No one else does it like him. The warden, now stunned into silence, finally asks the only question that matters. How? Ray, always cool under pressure, walks him through it. He figured out early on that the isolation block was near the fire garage. All he had to do was get himself thrown in. So he stirred up just enough trouble to land in solitary, then pulled off everything else step by step. And the rest? You already saw it, Ray says with a shrug. The warden doesn't know whether to be impressed or insulted. In the end, he just lets them go. Later, Ray walks back into his office for the first time in 5 months. Everything's the same. Dusty. Quiet. But waiting on his desk is a custom puzzle. A sleek 3D brain teaser that Hush, his teammate, has been designing for weeks. Maybe months. Ray picks it up, studies it for about 10 seconds, and then, click. Solved. Hush is standing off to the side, arms crossed, not sure whether to be amazed or annoyed. Show off, he mutters. Meanwhile, Lester's already working. He set up a meeting with Jessica Miller, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer from the CIA. She's read Ray's book on prison security flaws and knows exactly what he's capable of. But this time, the job she's offering isn't like anything they've done before. She wants Ray to test a brand new black site, a private prison so secret that even governments don't acknowledge it exists. No paper trail, no location, just concrete, steel, and the world's worst criminals. The team's immediately on edge. It sounds dangerous. Too dangerous. Hush and Abigail both tell him it's a bad idea. But then Lester slides a number across the table. Million. Enough to make anybody pause. Ray's still unsure. But then Jessica says something that hits differently. The men in this place, they're monsters. Not just criminals. Monsters who should never see the light of day again. That's what makes Ray lean back, stare at the ceiling, and start to think. Slowly, carefully, and finally he agrees. Jessica hands him his new identity, Anthony Portos, a Spanish terrorist for hire. Once he's inside, his only contact will be the warden, Roger Marsh. If things go sideways, there's only one way out. Ray has to use the extraction code. The day of the infiltration begins like clockwork. Hush follows protocol and implants a small tracker under Ray's skin. The only way his team will know where he is once he vanishes off the grid. But everything unravels fast. Out of nowhere, a black van screeches to a halt. The doors fly open and a group of masked men rush out. Before Ray can react, he's dragged inside. The operation is surgical. Cold. They don't speak. They just act. One of them finds the tracker immediately and cuts it out. No hesitation. Blood. Silence. No more signal. Then, they jab a heavy sedative into Ray's arm. Within seconds, the world blurs into darkness. They don't want him awake. They don't want him knowing where he's going. At some point during the journey, Ray regains consciousness. Briefly, he's inside a helicopter. Cold metal floor. Wind roaring outside. He looks around, barely able to move, and sees something horrific. A guard drives a knife into another prisoner, then hurls the body out the open side door like garbage. Ray tries to process it, but it's too late. Another jab, another dose, and everything fades again. When he wakes up, Ray finds himself inside the prison. It's like nothing he's seen before. A glass cell, suspended on a platform, elevated above a floor of glowing grids and surveillance lights. Around him, rows of similar cells, all transparent, all under constant watch. Guards in full black gear march silently with rifles. Cameras pivot in every direction. It feels more like a lab than a prison, a twisted science project with human lives at the center. Eventually, he's escorted to meet the warden. The man introduces himself with a calm smile. Warden Hobbs. Ray stiffens. That's not right. He was told the warden would be someone else. Where's Warden Marsh? He asks, confused. There is no Warden Marsh, Hobbs replies. The unease builds fast. Ray tells him about the man who was murdered in the helicopter. Hobbs brushes it off, annoyed that Ray even saw it happen. Ray, desperate, pulls his final card. He gives Hobbs the evacuation code, the secret phrase that should guarantee extraction, no questions asked. But Hobbs just chuckles. So, you give me a number and you walk out of here? Free as a bird. Then he leans in, cold and smug. You're not special. You're just another inmate. Ray is stunned. Every backup plan is gone. Outside the prison, Abigail and Hush are scrambling to find him. But with the tracker removed, their search is like trying to trace a shadow in fog. Back inside, a loudspeaker blares. The inmates are ordered to move to an area called Babylon, the prison yard. Ray stays still, frozen in his glass box, trying to make sense of it all. From across the way, a man hears the guards call him Portos, Ray's fake identity, and reacts with quiet recognition. In the yard, the violence is immediate. Ray watches guards beat prisoners with brutal efficiency. It's clear, here, the guards don't maintain order. They crush spirits. Soon, a group of massive inmates approach Ray. A welcome committee. Ray doesn't flinch. When one tries to get too close, Ray politely declines by snapping his fingers one by one. Brutal, precise. Before things escalate, the man who recognized his name earlier steps in. He brings backup, his own crew. His name is Emil Rotmeyer. He's clever, confident, and oddly friendly. He tries to strike up a conversation, even dropping a name. Mannheim, someone he used to work security for. But Ray keeps his distance. He's not here to make friends. In the warden's office, Hobbs is dealing with his own mess. He reprimands the officer who killed the inmate in the helicopter. Not because of morality, but because it's bad for business. The prisoner's cost will be deducted from the guard's salary. This isn't justice. This is commerce. Meanwhile, Ray begins observing. He studies the guards, the layout, the flow of movement. He's done this before. He just needs a crack in the system. Emil won't leave him alone. He keeps offering to help, asking questions, pushing for a connection. Eventually, Ray realizes he might need him. This isn't a prison. It's a place where the ultra-wealthy send their enemies to disappear. To learn more, Ray decides to explore the isolation area. But to get in, he has to be thrown into solitary. So he turns to Emil. Emil, eager to assist, punches Ray in the face. Ray and Emil didn't hold back. What started as a punch turned into a full-blown WWE-style showdown. Fists flying, bodies slamming. The two went at it like their lives depended on it. The entire prison came to a halt as inmates crowded around to watch. Up in his surveillance booth, Warden Hobbs leaned in closer to the monitors, visibly amused by the spectacle playing out below. It was entertainment for him. Just another day of chaos, serve hot. Their reward? Solitary confinement, or something much worse. Ray and Emil were tossed into the isolation unit, a hellish metal box designed to break men. It wasn't just a cell, it was a torture chamber. The walls glowed with the heat of industrial halogen lights. The air was stifling, dry, unbreathable. The temperature soared beyond human limits, the room turning into an oven that baked them alive. In my country, we call it a sauna, Emil muttered through gritted teeth, sweat dripping down his face. From behind the safety of glass, Hobbs watched them roast in silence, entertained by their suffering like a man watching a dogfight. After a full day inside that inferno, a prison doctor finally arrived. His presence wasn't a mercy, it was routine. Ray seized the moment. He leaned in, his voice low, asking where they were. Where is this prison located? The doctor hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. A guard suddenly barged in, demanding to know what was being said. The doctor panicked, lied, said it was just dehydration talk. But Ray had heard everything. That tiny flicker of doubt, that pause. The doctor knew something. He could be the key. Meanwhile, outside those concrete walls, Abigail and Hush were growing desperate. They cornered Lester, demanding answers. Where was Ray? Lester tried to play it cool. Everything was by the book. He urged them to trust the contract. But Hush wasn't buying it. He shoved Lester against a wall, made it clear that excuses weren't going to cut it anymore. Under pressure, Lester finally gave in and promised to call Jessica. Back in prison, Ray and Emil were released from the heat box, skin burning, throats dry. But Ray wasn't slowing down. He shared his latest observation. The chamber floors weren't reinforced with aluminum. They were riveted steel. Weaker. If he could pull the rivets out, maybe, just maybe, there was a way through. He needed a tool. Emil had to get him something sharp, something metal. Emil didn't hesitate. He told the guards he had intel on Mannheim, a juicy enough offer to earn him a meeting with the warden. Inside Hobbs' office, Emil stalled. He teased. He joked. And then he mocked. Instead of giving real coordinates, he sketched a ridiculous map filled with arrows and pirate treasure-style doodles. Hobbs wasn't laughing. Furious, the warden ordered his men to torture Emil. They pinned him down and shoved a high-pressure water hose down his throat. It was brutal, efficient, and when it was done, Emil, bruised and choking, managed to steal a drain cover from the floor. He tucked it away without anyone noticing. Later, he passed it to Ray, but he wanted something in return. Ray finally opened up. He told Emil the truth about who he really was, about his job, and about how this facility had been built using his own security research. Hobbs had used Ray's own book to design a prison even he couldn't break out of. But Ray had found something, a flaw. He polished the drain cover with toothpaste, turning it into a makeshift mirror. With the right angle, it could reflect enough heat to weaken the rivets on the floor. All he needed was a distraction. Emil nodded. Ray grabbed a piece of bread and slipped it into his pocket. Meanwhile, Emil approached a nearby inmate, Javed, and launched a stream of vulgar insults about his mother. Predictably, Javed snapped. Within seconds, fists were flying. Guards swarmed in, cracking batons and barking orders. The riot had started. Just as planned, Ray and Emil were thrown back into isolation with the others. Ray immediately began heating the rivets with a reflected light. He worked fast, always just out of camera range. Once ready, he banged on the wall, the signal. Emil erupted into a fit, screaming in gibberish, thrashing around to grab attention. While the guards scrambled to deal with him, Ray pulled out the bread and smeared it across the security camera lens, just enough to blind the feed. Then, without a sound, he slipped down into the vent system. It was tight, cramped, but it was working until it wasn't. Ray's foot clipped a pipe, snapping a valve. A sudden rush of water burst through the vents, flooding the isolation zone. He didn't stop. Not yet. Meanwhile, Hobbs stormed into Emil's cell, demanding answers. Emil just grinned and began speaking a foreign language, stringing together nonsense words that only infuriated the warden more. Ray reached the outer edge of the vents and dropped down into open air. What he saw left him stunned. This wasn't underground. This whole facility, it was inside a floating cargo ship in the middle of the ocean. The truth hit him hard. He had been duped. Everything he thought he knew about the prison structure was wrong. Ray quickly retreated, slipping back inside before he could be spotted. Water from the broken valve was still pouring in, spreading fast through the chamber floors, throwing the guards into disarray. It gave him just enough cover to move unseen. Meanwhile, back in the city, Abigail and Hush confronted Lester again. They weren't letting go. Abigail pressed hard. Had he really spoken to Jessica? Was he still lying? Lester swore he had, swore everything was still on schedule. But Abigail wasn't convinced. Not this time, because now, Ray's paycheck for the job had been put on hold, making the situation even more concerning. Back inside the prison, the storm was far from over. Warden Hobbs, stiff with tension, stalked the flooded halls alongside his top officer. The water had finally been drained, but the damage was undeniable. Bent panels, warped pipes, and then something worse. Hobbs stopped cold. Several rivets were missing. He crouched down, inspecting the empty holes. Someone had tampered with the structure, and recently. This wasn't just routine damage. This was a breach attempt. He didn't say a word, but his eyes burned with fury. At that same moment, a call came in. It was Lester. On the surface, Lester was Ray's business partner. In reality, he was the spider in the center of the web. Calmly, he told Hobbs everything. Ray's identity, his mission, the infiltration. But instead of asking for Ray to be extracted, Lester gave a different order. Make sure he never gets out. It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. Because Lester wasn't just a name on a company letterhead anymore. He was the CEO of this prison. This off-the-books, investor-funded fortress that operated in the shadows. The job Ray thought he'd taken from the CIA? It was all a lie. Lester had used Ray's own reputation to sell the idea of the tomb. A prison so inescapable, even Ray couldn't beat it. The truth? Lester was hunting Emil's boss, Mannheim, a digital ghost with the power to collapse the global financial system through a devastating encryption program. A reward had been placed on Mannheim's head by a group of terrified billionaires. And Lester wanted it more than anything. To speed things up, he ordered Hobbs to intensify Emil's interrogation. Make him talk, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Hobbs turned his full wrath on Ray. The beatings became relentless. The sleep deprivation, cruel. Day after day, Ray was dragged back and forth like an animal, his body weakening, his mind fraying. But through the pain, one voice refused to let him fall apart. Emil's. Stay focused, he told Ray, gripping his shoulder in the moments between chaos. You've got more to fight for than you know. The prison doctor, usually distant, was starting to change too. Each time he cleaned Ray's wounds, something in his eyes shifted. Guilt, maybe even regret. To keep Ray's mind from falling into the dark, Emil asked about his past. At first, Ray said nothing. But finally, broken and raw, he whispered the truth. He had once been a prosecutor, a good one. And then, one day, the man he put behind bars escaped and murdered Ray's wife and child. That night, Ray had made a promise to himself. He would devote his life to building prisons that no one could ever break out of again. Hearing that, Emil stared at him hard. You've been trying to lock everyone away, he said softly. But now you've got a reason to break out. Ray didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. Somewhere far away, Abigail and Hush were still fighting, still searching. They hadn't given up, not even close. Hush dug deeper, hacking every private record he could find. What he uncovered made his stomach turn. There was a place, an illegal, private prison, buried in whispered contracts and black money. The tomb. It was real, and it was where Ray had been dumped. But no matter how hard they searched, they still couldn't find it on a map. Back inside, Ray and Emil changed tactics. The guards were impossible to track. Identical uniforms, identical masks. But Ray, always observant, had been watching for patterns, speech, posture, little habits. They gave each one a nickname. Limp, Whistler, Mr. Cigarettes. They were building a mental map. And now, they needed the doctor's help. To give Ray a window to speak with him, Emil stabbed Ray in the thigh. Deep, enough to send him limping to the infirmary. While the doctor stitched him up, Ray leaned in. Desperate, he spoke about the Hippocratic Oath, about humanity, about doing the right thing, even in a place like this. The doctor listened, but his face stayed hard. I don't even know if you're the good guy, he said quietly. No one here is. Still, while his hands moved, Ray's did too, silently swiping clotting powder and a few other supplies from the tray. He had a new plan. They needed to find the ship's location. If they couldn't be found, they'd find themselves. Ray and Emil stole a pair of thick glasses from another inmate. Using cardboard, a pen, and the lenses, Ray built a makeshift sextant, a primitive navigation tool. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. To use it, though, they had to reach the top deck and see the stars. But before they could act, a new challenge appeared. Hobbs summoned Ray to his office. There, the warden dropped a bombshell. You're being transferred. New block. Effective immediately. It was a tactic, a way to sever Ray from Emil. But Ray didn't panic. Instead, he made a play of his own. He offered up a trade, information about Mannheim. He claims that Emil trusts him and that, given enough time, he could extract Mannheim's location from him. Warden Hobbs, intrigued by Ray's proposal, gave a slow, calculating nod. He agreed to let Ray stay near Emil, for now. But it wasn't trust. It was surveillance. He wanted to see if Ray could deliver. What he didn't realize was that Ray already had. Back in the cell block, Ray wasted no time. He pulled Emil aside and explained everything. The fake deal, the bluff about Mannheim, and the small window they now had to move. Emil didn't hesitate. He'd play his part too, feeding Ray a stream of made-up stories about Mannheim's hideout, his connections, even encrypted codes, lies wrapped in just enough truth to keep the warden busy. With Hobbs distracted chasing ghosts, they turned to their next step, getting to the deck. To do that, they needed help. And in that hellish floating prison, the only one they could trust was Javed, the Muslim inmate whose faith kept him disciplined, calm, and underestimated. They approached him quietly, laid out the plan, and he agreed without question. Soon after, Javed was summoned to the warden's office. He told Hobbs what he wanted to hear, that he'd been watching Ray and had information about an escape plan. But in return, he asked for something simple, something the warden wouldn't question. He wanted to pray outside, under the sky, just as his faith required. Hobbs smirked. An easy ask, one more snitch in his pocket. He granted Javed access to the top deck, completely unaware that Javed was about to change the game. Once outside, in the fresh ocean air, Javed moved fast. He raised the makeshift sextant Ray had built and began calculating their latitude using the stars. When he returned, he brought a miracle with him. They were somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean near Morocco. Ray's brain shifted into high gear, triangulating their location. Still unsure of the precise spot, Emil had a flash of hope. He had a friend in Casablanca, someone who owed him a favor big enough to risk everything. But to call for help, they'd need to get a message out. Ray came up with the next play. He swallowed the stolen clotting powder, forcing himself into a sudden medical emergency. Mouth foaming, skin pale, trembling like he'd been poisoned. In the infirmary, barely able to speak, he told the doctor everything. His real name, his true identity, that he was not a criminal, that he'd been set up. If the doctor didn't believe him, he begged him to check one place, Warden Hobbs' office. His book, his life's work, was hidden there, and it would prove everything. That night, the doctor sat alone in his office, staring at a glass of whiskey. His hands trembled. Finally, he made a decision. He snuck into Hobbs' private quarters and found the book. And as he opened the pages, everything shifted. Ray wasn't lying. Ray was right. Sickened by the betrayal and the lies, the doctor made his choice. He ordered the guards to bring Ray to him immediately. When Ray arrived, the doctor's face was different. Resolved. "How do I help?" he asked. Ray didn't hesitate. "Email Emil's contact. Casablanca. Do it tonight." And he did. The next morning, the pieces began to move. Ray walked into Hobbs' office with another fabricated breadcrumb about Mannheim. A false location, just misleading enough to keep Hobbs biting. Around the same time, Javed approached Hobbs again, whispering that a riot was about to erupt in Block C. He told him to keep an eye on Ray, that he might be the spark. Paranoid and eager to stay ahead, Hobbs glued himself to the surveillance monitors. And there was Ray in the corner, tapping out Morse code with his fingers. A message, a signal. It worked. Believing the riot was real, Hobbs immediately dispatched all his guards to Block C, leaving only 2 stationed in Babylon. The trap was set. At that exact moment, the doctor hit send, transmitting an email across the sea to Emil's contact in Casablanca. Minutes later, Javed started the riot in Babylon. Loud, chaotic, and unstoppable. In the confusion, Ray, Emil, and Javed sprinted toward the top deck. But Hobbs spotted them. "Lock it down," he barked. Metal doors slammed shut around the cargo hold, sealing every exit. Above them, the roar of helicopters broke through the night. Emil's people had come, hovering over the deck with harnesses and ropes, ready for extraction. Inside, the guards clashed with the prisoners. A brutal shootout broke out. Javed was hit. He dropped hard, bleeding, his breath ragged. Ray and Emil froze. Ray's brain spun through every possibility, every second they had left. "The power system," he said. "If I shut it down, every door opens." He turned to Emil. "You get to the top deck. Get on that chopper. I'll find another way out." Emil hesitated, torn. He looked back at Javed. "I'm not leaving him." But Javed grabbed his arm, eyes full of fire. "Go. I'll hold them." Ray nodded. Emil, with tears in his eyes, handed him 2 pistols. Javed gripped the weapons, his hands trembling but steady. Then Emil ran, disappearing into the smoke. Back in the corridor, the guards advanced on Javed. He didn't wait. He raised both guns, let out a breath, and made his final stand. Meanwhile, deep inside the belly of the ship, Ray races toward the control room. The corridors echo with the distant sound of gunfire and alarms, but he doesn't flinch. He's come too far to turn back now. Suddenly, he's not alone. From around the corner, the prison officer emerges, face twisted in fury. The 2 men collide, fists flying in a brutal, close-quarters brawl. Every punch is a test of endurance, every move desperate. They crash into walls, grapple on the metal steps, grunting and bleeding. At last, Ray gains the upper hand, slamming the officer backward, sending him tumbling down the steel staircase. The man's body hits the bottom with a sickening final thud. Ray doesn't wait. He kicks open the door to the control center, slams down on the manual override, and kills the power. In an instant, the prison's locks disengage. Doors swing open, alarms wail, and chaos floods every level. On the top deck, Emil sees his chance. With the hatch open, he bolts across the deck under relentless gunfire. Bullets ping around him as he reaches the helicopter, yanking a machine gun from its side. He shouts to his team, ordering them to hold position and wait for Ray. But they're taking hits. They can't hold out much longer. They have to lift off. The chopper rises, hovering above the chaos. On board, Emil's eyes scan the ship, praying that Ray will still make it. Back below deck, Ray is out of time. With guards swarming the control level, he dives into the flushing tank, wedging himself in as tightly as he can. Then everything shifts. The power comes back online. The fuel conversion system hums to life. Within seconds, water begins flooding the tank. Ray holds his breath, but the pressure builds rapidly, and then, with explosive force, he's flushed out into the open ocean. On deck, Hobbs rushes to the rail, eyes wide as he spots something moving in the waves. Just offshore, Emil sees him too. "Ray!" He shouts to the pilot and lowers the helicopter's ladder. Ray, half drowned and exhausted, swims through the churning sea and grabs hold, dragging himself up with everything he has left. But Hobbs isn't finished. The warden raises his rifle and opens fire. A bullet grazes Emil. Another rips through the air, nearly striking the dangling ladder. Ray knows there's only one shot left. He draws his gun, aims back at the ship, and fires at the oil tank stacked on the deck. Boom! The explosion is enormous, tearing through the platform and sending Hobbs and his men flying in a fiery inferno. The flames consume everything behind them as the helicopter peels away, soaring into the clouds. Later, the chopper touches down on the Moroccan coast. Ray and Emil step onto solid ground for the first time in days. A black car pulls up to meet them. The door opens, and Jessica steps out. Ray freezes, confused. Before he can speak, Emil calmly turns to him and says, "Ray, meet my daughter." Ray's breath catches in his throat. It all falls into place. Emil is Mannheim, the very man Ray was told Emil worked for. He had faked his identity all along, not to manipulate Ray, but to protect himself. The only way to stay safe from his enemies was to let the world believe he no longer existed. Jessica, knowing exactly where her father had been hidden, had orchestrated the entire mission, from his setup to the contract to Ray's imprisonment. It had all been a long con, designed not to test the prison, but to break him out. Even the alias Porto Ray was given had been a code, a signal meant only for Mannheim. Before they part ways, Jessica shares one last piece of information. A warning, one that Ray keeps in the back of his mind. When Ray returns home, he's greeted by Abigail. Their reunion is quiet but full of meaning. She tells him what they discovered. Lester had orchestrated everything. He'd struck a deal to become CEO of the prison, but only if the facility was truly inescapable. Now that Ray had broken out, Lester panicked. He began packing his bags, hoping to disappear before the consequences found him. But it was already too late. Hush and Abigail had tracked him down. They found him just before he could make his getaway. As he fumbled with his keys in the driver's seat, Hush appeared out of the shadows and struck. Lester's world went black. When he finally regained consciousness, groggy and disoriented, he looked around in confusion. His car inside a shipping container, and that container is locked up tight, sealed aboard a massive cargo ship, heading to an unknown destination. Trapped with no escape, Lester now faces the same fate he had planned for Ray.